We can now bring in Dr. Guy Lurie, Research Fellow, Democratic Principles and Media Reform Program at the Israel Democracy Institute. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 tonight. Protests have been gripping Israel for weeks now, yet the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seems intent on pushing this reform through. Given the voices inside and outside Israel that have been calling for dialogue over the past 48 hours or so, do you think the Prime Minister will listen?
Well, it's hard to say. There's a lot of, I think his base are still very much inclined to push through this change in the constitutional system of Israel. But yes, there's a lot of concern and call from the street, and indeed some of his, I think, allies are starting to seem a little less keen on pushing forward with this type of resistance coming from a lot of the streets in Israel and from outside of Israel too.
I'm curious, why does Netanyahu's base want this reform?
Well, I think a lot of it is coming from a perception wrong, I think, that there's a disbalance of imbalance between the judiciary and the executive, and especially there's a lot of with charges brought against Netanyahu. He tried to create a perception that these are false charges and the legal system is after him. And a lot of people have bought into this story.
So is this why he's doing it, for his own interest, his corruption trial?
It's difficult to say, but I fear that is part of the reason, yes.
And if he does this, then what happens next? Does this open a sort of Pandora's box in Israeli society? Is that what people are scared of? That's why they're out on the streets?
Well, I think the issue here is that the Supreme Court and the Judiciary are really the only gatekeeper, the only checks and balances on the power of the executive and the legislature, which are, as your reporter just said, are almost entwined in Israel. And so these are the only institutional checks on the power of the executive. And the fear is that the next steps in this reform will be value changes in the values of Israel, creating a less liberal kind of country, a system where there's more religious suppression or oppression, and less liberal values in public life.
So when you say values, do you think they could possibly go after things like same-sex marriage or abortion? Are those the values you think that could get chipped away?
LGBTQ values are much, are part of the things that there's fear that they'll go after, and equality and gender equality, rights, and that and really liberty kind of rights that are feared to be under attack once the institutional safeguards are down.
Dr. Guy Lurie, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me.